let's start with for my thought today, let's start with some formulas. Some finance formulas. Someone want to tell me what that formula is right there? Expected return on a portfolio. What does that tell us? What does that tell us? So we know what the formula is. Now tell me what the formula tells me. How do I read it? What does it mean? Okay. So the return on the portfolio is equal to the sum of the weights of the expected return of each of those portfolios. Kia, can you just put your binder right in front of that so people can't see? It's going to take a second to erase. Just put it in front of the projector. Hide it just for a second. Okay, now what's this one here? Okay, now that's perfect. That's all right. What's this one here? Okay, you can turn it back on now. I just had to. What is that formula there? So what is that? So the variance of a portfolio, what's another word for variance? So kind of the risk. So the risk of a portfolio is the sum of the weight squared times standard deviation from the sum weights, one asset, two assets, standard deviation times the correlation. Here, you want to close it once more. So, oh yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. Thank you, Howard. Okay. So we're familiar with those. This is probably what I think is the most important formula in finance you'll ever have. So it's probably one you guys have seen lots of times, but I thought we'd put it up there. Someone want to tell me what that formula is? Most important formula in finance. Okay, you can put this up. Sorry, that's what it was before. What's this one here? Probably the most important finance formula you'll ever learn. If you had me for another class, let someone else figure it out. Mike has. It's probably the most important formula in finance. Have you ever seen that formula? Not in your 301 or your 201 classes? What do you think it is, Eric?
Well, it's what you want versus what God wants.
Yeah. If what you want is less than or equal to importance than what God wants, will you make decisions in life correctly? And I think that's the key to life. Christ said, I do nothing but what I've seen the Father do. And he was the greatest of all. This morning when we were reading scriptures as a family, my wife is coming back from Disneyland. I had to come back early, but he says that the standard that we are asked to meet is not that of perfection, although we are striving for it, but rather that we are keeping the commandments and doing our best to live as disciples of Jesus Christ. And so I think if we understand these formulas and realize that we try perfection, but the standard is really just trying to do the best we can as disciples of Jesus Christ. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. Today we're going to talk about auto ownership. Sometimes as a teacher you wonder, are these things worthwhile? Last night I had a couple come to my house, and they're good friends. They both took this class, and then they were in my 415 class as well, and they came up and they said, Brother Sudweeks, they were really excited. We got to tell you about what we did. So they just bought a house. Young couple, they've been married about 3 years. They've been out of school. She's been out of school a year, and he's been out a couple of years. But they said it was just a really interesting experience going and talking to the mortgage brokers. Because for the salary they made, they could have gotten a lot bigger house. And they says, no, we don't want a bigger house. And they says, well, you probably can get a single family for the price of this townhome. And they says, no, we want the townhome because in a little bit we want to actually use it as an investment. And they got an interest rate of 3.3% with no points. And they just said, we wanted to come by and tell you that we follow the things that we're teaching you in the class. And they were just excited. But the point here is, again, I turned to them and I said, do you think we're on track to save you your $1 million? And they smiled and they said, yes. You need 3.3%, 30-year fixed with no points. and they borrowed about 2/3 of what they could borrow. And so their goal is they've already got their cars paid off. Their goal is to have their house paid off as quickly as they can as well. So what we're doing is we're talking about auto ownership today, buying cars. And so there's not a section on your personal financial plan, so it's mainly for your knowledge. But I think it's important. It's important that we understand. And the question, is there a best time to buy a vehicle? My home teaching companion is a guy by the name of Kermit McKinney. He's just probably one of the smartest people I know. I joke I have the funny initials after my name, and he's got the smarts. But he was telling me the story about he and his friend, they decided they wanted to pick up some pickup trucks. And they saw that there were these two Silverado 1500 pickup trucks at the Chevy garage, and they'd been there for a long time. And so he talked with his friend and says, if we can get those for $18,000 out the door, I think that'd be a good deal. And his friend agreed. And they had cash that they could pay for it. And so he went by the dealership, and he said, I saw you've got those two white trucks, Silverado 1500 trucks there. My buddy and I are interested, and when you can give them to us for $18,000 out the door, he said, we'll take them. And the guy goes, $18,000 out the door, you're crazy. It'll never happen. He says, but I'll tell you what. He says, I'll give them to you for $25,000 for taxes, tags, and license. And that was basically close to MSRP. And Kermit said, no, thank you. $18,000 out the door, we'll do it. And so a month went by, and trucks were still sitting there in the lot. Walked back into the same guy, and he says, again, I talked with you a month ago. But when you're willing to take those trucks for $18,000 out the door, we'll take them both. The guy says, you're never going to see that. But I will tell you what, $22,000, I can give you a deal today for $22,000. That's $3,000 off MSRP. It's a good deal. You ought to take it. Kermit said, $18,000 off the door. A month later, there was still same thing. He walked in. He said, $18,000 out the door. I'll give it. We'll take them off your hands. The guy says, no way. But he says, for about 21, we could probably do it with taxes, tags, and license. Kermit gave him his card and says, what? Here's my card. When you can do it for $18,000 out the door, just give me a call, and we'll come and do it. I think it wasn't sure if he said it was the end of the month or the end of the quarter. It was 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, the last day of the month. He got this phone call that said, hey, is this Kermit? And Kermit said, yes. He says, if you can be here in an hour, you can have both of those vehicles for $18,000 out the door. And he got them. And so are there better times to buy? Are there better times? And are there scams out there too? Let me just share this stuff again. It's called Don't Get Taken, the #1 sales scam. Are these deals too good to be true? Scenario 1, 0 down, 0 interest, 0 payments for 1 year. Sure, the deal looks good, but when the year is up, you find out all the payments you've delayed, sometimes plus interest. You're now expected to pay much, much more than sticker price on what has become a used car. The scam is some contracts state that the buyer owes the dealer X number of monthly payments at a high interest rate. So there was this person who bought this one car with the 000. What they didn't realize, when the 0 deal was up, the interest payments kicked in retroactively, and now they couldn't afford it. What should you do? Should you fall for the 000 scam? And the answer is no. Scam number 2, what can you afford to pay per month? The scenario is this. The salesman greets you with this line, hey, what can you afford to pay? Trying to use your payment limit to determine the model he'll recommend as the price he'll charge. What do you think? What's the problem with how much can you pay each month? Is the dealer knows what each of the payments are. And basically, they can actually extend the payments over more years to reduce the payment. So what should you do? Number 1, negotiate the price of the vehicle first, and then calculate the money. How about this one? I've heard this one on the radio here. Come on in, we'll pay off your old car loan. The ad suggests that the dealer will assume assume your old car debt. Do they really assume your old car debt? No, you don't. What do? Yeah, they roll that into the new loan. Scam the dealer. The debt doesn't simply disappear. Whatever you owe on your old vehicle is rolled into your new loan. Say you owe $8,000 on your car and you buy a new one for $21,000, you owe the dealership $29,000 minus any trade-in value. So what do? Should you terminate a lease before the lease is over? No. So stick with your original lease to avoid early termination fees, which can top 5%. Not 5% of the lease payments, 5% of the value of the lease. And don't trade a car if you're still upside down on the loan, meaning you owe more than the car is worth. Here's another one, scam, lying about your credit score. The scenario, the dealer shaves points off your score. Alas, you don't qualify for the low interest loan that initially drew you to the dealership in the first place. So point is, and I'm not saying that all car salesmen are that, but just be aware. So the salesman said, I'm sorry you didn't qualify because your credit score is too low. So what should you do? You know your credit score before going in. Say, well, I'm sorry you don't qualify because your credit score is going low. Are you guys going out of business? I know I've got a credit score of 762. If you can't give me the best thing with a 762, you guys must be in pretty bad shape. Are you guys going out of business? So here's another one, scam. Pay more will say you stole the car. The scenario, the salesman says you can drive home today in your dream car. And you also qualify for a better interest rate than you expected if you finance with the dealership. You sign the papers and away you go. A week later, the salesman calls. You didn't qualify for the low rate after all. Here's the scam. You missed the fine print in the contract that reads subject to financing approval. You may be told you need a larger down payment, you need to pay higher interest rates, or the salesman may threaten to report the car as stolen. What do? You take the dealer financing only if it beats the best rate you can find elsewhere. Before taking possession of the car, make sure you have an approved financing agreement. Why do they want you to take the car? What have they found out? What have dealers found out? As soon as you drive away that car, yeah, it's really hard to return it. And so as soon as they can get you to drive the car, well, just take it for a day and drive it and come back. It's very hard for people, once they're in the car and driving, to say no. How about this? The arbitrations clause, don't sign it. The scenario, after you've bought your new car, transferred your title, and signed the paperwork, an increasing number of dealerships place another piece of paper in front of you. It states that you must agree to arbitrate any future agreements. The scam, this kind of binding arbitration clause used at many dealerships, you waive the right to sue, to participate in class action lawsuit or appeal. What should you do? You know what? Just don't sign it. Don't buy from a dealer who requires this. And realize automobiles are commodities. You know, I was talking with my nephew this weekend. He works for a large auto manufacturer. And usually things really work out well until they get you into where, after you've agreed to the car, and then they try to get you to sign these extended service contracts and all of these insurance. Do you have to sign those things? And the answer is no. So do you have to sign this binding arbitration? And the answer is no. And you say, you know what, if I have to sign that, I'll have to take my business elsewhere. Are you sure you want to lose your business over one piece of paper? And what do you think they'll do? They'll probably take it away. Here's the last one. No haggling allowed. Scenario. In a recent survey of new car buyers, 38% didn't negotiate. Many thought or were told that the dealer wouldn't haggle because of special pricing or financing on the vehicle. But consider this, respondents who negotiated typically saved around $1,700. Is it a good idea to negotiate? Yeah. Sometimes people don't like to. If anyone's buying a new car, come and talk to me. I like to negotiate. I love to negotiate. But the point is if we're wise at what we do, and realize if it takes you 30 minutes to negotiate, and you save $1,700, that's $3,400 an hour. You know, my wife and I, when we were out, we were looking for an Expedition. It's the one we have now that's got 160,000 miles. And what's bad if you make an offer? What's the worst thing they can do? Say no. And so we would go in and we'd make an offer. And you know how the car salesmen are. They always put their arm around you and kind of pull you close. And we were working with this one guy. And so he made an offer, and we countered with another offer. And he goes, Bryan, he says, I just wouldn't be making any money. And so I did just like he did. I put my arm around him and I pulled him in close. And I said, John, I promise you I won't force you to take my money. And the worst thing, even if you make an offer and they don't accept it, the key here is you're not any worse off than you were before. And so the challenge is what do we do? How do we handle it? It's a big decision. It's not necessarily the biggest decision we'll make, but it still is a big one. Again, this is from another nephew. Sorry about this. You're getting all this. So he asked me a bunch of questions. How are you doing? Misty and I are doing well in Salt Lake. Physical therapy school is treating me well. And then he had one question. He says that the second question I have for you is more for the future. I have heard many opinions on the subject, and I'm just curious to what yours is. When it comes to a vehicle, would you rather lease or buy? I'm just curious as we prepare for our future. What do you guys think? Lease or buy? Yeah, it depends on what you want it for. If I could get a great deal on a lease, I would do a lease. But like here with everything else, what we want to do is give you the tools to compare, and then you can make the decisions. I was talking with Gary Rhodes, and there's actually a website called Swap-A-Lease. And you can go in there, and these are lease vehicles that generally what happens is they've got a year left, and they've only got 2,000 or 3,000 miles on it. But you want a really expensive luxury vehicle with only 1,000 miles a month or 500 miles a month? A lot of these people are willing to pay you to a degree, so reduce the cost so you can have access to it. So you want it for a year, things like that. The key is realize there's no hard and fast rules, but do your homework. So let's start with a little bit of leasing terminology. So just some leasing terminology. Here's kind of the framework. Know the terminology, narrow your choices, determine your total price and negotiate, finance if you must. I prefer we don't finance, and then enjoy your purchase. So terminology, MSRP, it's manufacturer's silly retail price. If you're silly enough to pay for it, you probably will. Capitalized cost. This is your agreed to or your negotiated cost. Hopefully it's significantly less than your MSRP. Capitalized cost reduction. This is any reductions, capitalized costs such as rebates, any down payments, dealer incentives, your trade-in. So anything to reduce that capitalized cost. And the net capitalized cost is your capitalized cost less any capitalized cost reduction. So you agreed to 22, you have $1,000 on the rebates, and so your net capitalized cost is that. And then residual value, the expected value of the vehicle at terminal end, at the term end. How do you calculate the residual value of a vehicle? Do you get to decide what that residual value is? No. Where do they find that? Yeah, Kelley Blue Book, a lot of these auto things. And it's a number that's set by probably the automobile industry. So is that based on MSRP or negotiated cost? Yeah, why is it MSRP? Yeah, they don't know what you do. So Eric is a better negotiator than I did. He paid 23 for it, and I paid 24. Is the vehicle, the value the same at the end of the term? And the answer is yes. Okay, 3 parts to a lease. When it comes to a lease, there's really 3 parts. The first is the usage or depreciation. For a purchased vehicle, we'd call it depreciation for a business vehicle. And it's the amount of the value that's used over the lease life. You take your net capitalized cost less the residual value. So if you don't do anything down, it's your capitalized cost minus your residual value. And that's how much you use. What's the benefit of a lease? Why do people like leases? Yes? So he repays. So benefit of a lease is generally it's for a shorter period of time. Most of the time, over that time period, you've got a warranty. So the interesting thing is there's a number of people who lease a vehicle for 5 years, and the warranty is only for 3 years. Those last 2 years, who's responsible? You are. What's another reason people like leases? Lower payments. So what happens here, your usage is only the amount you've used for those 3 years. There's still value after that vehicle at the end of those 3 years. And so you're not paying for that. You're not paying for that value there. Other benefits of leasing. So lower cost. You get the newest car. It's kind of a status symbol. Like every 2 years or every 3 years, I get a new car. Now, why do dealers? Go ahead. You can buy it at the end. Yeah. Yeah. So low cost, new car. You can possibly buy it at the end. What's the difference between an open-ended lease and a closed-end lease? Mike? Right. And an open-ended lease, there's not. And so if the value of the vehicle is less than the MSRP, guess who pays the difference? You do. Why do dealers like leases? Why do dealers like leases? Eric? Oh, yeah. Every 3 years, they sell a new car. What are the profits on the new car? Are they higher than lower than used cars? They're a lot higher. So profits, so they get a steady income of people putting, how about people like us? Do we like leases or buys? Yeah, so minute you drive it off the lot, huge hit. Cost for insurance, very high. And so the research has found that if someone would keep a car, I remember seeing the piece of research, that if, instead of getting a new car every 2 to 3 years, if you'll keep your car for 10 years and then sell it over the lifetime, you'll save almost $500,000 in that, just because you've got things. My goal is to get 200,000 miles out of all my vehicles. Now, my wife and I, we were working in San Francisco. We paid all of our tithes and offerings. We were saving for retirement, things like that, and we decided to get a car. And so I've always liked Mustangs, and so we got a Mustang. And my wife, I said, I'll get a used one. She said, no, get a new one. Now, it was a convertible. Now, what's the downside on convertibles? If you flip them. So I put a roll bar in it. Good idea or bad idea? Can I do that with a lease vehicle? No. I also got some Cobra R rims and stuck it on it too. You know, stop better. That's what I told my wife. She laughed. But can you do that with a lease vehicle? No, you can't make those changes. And so realize, so usage is your depreciation, how much you use. The second thing we look at is your interest or your finance cost. Now, realize that there's a thing called a money factor. And what a money factor is, it's a way of calculating interest costs. I actually think it was set up to kind of hide the actual cost. But so the way we calculate our interest or our finance costs, it's your net capitalized cost plus your residual times your money factor. And your money factor is your APR divided by 24. So let's kind of see if we can think about this a little bit. How much, remember when we talked about consumer loans? It's your average cost by your average interest rate. Your average amount borrowed times your average interest rate. So how do we calculate our average amount borrowed with a lease? Let's say it was $20,000 now. When we turn it in at the end of 3 years, it's going to be worth $10,000. How do I calculate what's my average amount borrowed? How do you calculate your average amount borrowed? So right now it's worth 20. When I hand it in 3 years, it'll be worth 10. What's the average amount borrowed over that time period? 15. How did you get that 15? Okay, right. So you take 20,000 is what your cost was. You add your residual, which is 10. That gives me 30. Divided by 2 gives me 15. So 15,000 is my amount borrowed. How do I calculate my monthly interest rate? Is it just APR divided by 12? And so then notice that. So net cap cost plus residual divided by 2 times your average interest rates. So if I take my APR, 2 times 12 gives 24. That gives me my monthly cost. And we'll do a problem to show it. And then your taxes or government costs is just your usage plus your interest times your tax rate. So let's explain this money factor again a little bit. So average amount borrowed is just your net capitalized cost residual divided by 2. Average interest rate is APR divided by 12. So realize your money factor is APR divided by 24 times that, and that is your monthly interest cost, regardless of the number of months of the lease. So realize that 24 is not months. Does that make sense? We'll do a problem here to make it easier. Okay. So let's let's do a problem and see how we do. Okay, you've negotiated the price of a car with the dealer and now she wants to decide whether she should lease or buy the car. So the manufacturer's silly retail price, 25. They negotiated at 22, a down payment of 2,000, the lease term and residual, 3 years and 55%. So what is the value of the lease at term end? What's the value of this car going to be? Pardon me? How do I calculate that? 55% of 5, and what's that? Yeah, 13,750. Okay, so now we've got a number of fees: acquisition, registration, license, documentation, and termination. Which of those fees are for lease? Which of those are for buy? And which of them for both? Acquisition, lease. Registration, both. License, both. Documentation, both. Termination, lease. So can't you see right now, acquisition and termination fees are additional fees you pay for a lease. Now they're negotiable. Which of those do you have to pay taxes on? Actually, you don't pay taxes on any of those. I had to go through lease documents to find out. Okay, rent charge and loan rate, that's just your APR, and your sales tax, 6.25%. So our view here is we want to decide solely on costs. Now, in order to make this an apples-to-apples comparison, I had to make some adjustments. So she'll pay cash for the down payment, taxes on the down payment and fees, but we'll finance the remainder, including other taxes. Okay. So, and we're going to assume the value at term end is the residual value. Because what we want to do, again, we want to be able to compare a lease with a buy. Does it seem like we've made an apples-to-apples comparison? We've tried. Okay, let's get in our groups, and let's take about 5 minutes. If you have a question, raise your hand.
Oh, so this is, we're just doing the lease section?
So we're going to do the lease first, and then you want to do a purchase.
Oh, okay.
So her goal is to decide whether she should lease or whether she should buy.
Oh, wait. Yeah, that's
Just for lease. And is that negotiable?
Because that's what you have to multiply on the loan.
3 years.
3 years of interest.
Should she buy or should she lease? Solely on cost. You can add up all the costs of the leasing, add up all the costs of the buy.
Yeah.
So does everyone understand the problem? If we lease it, what are all the costs we'll pay for this 3-year period? If we buy, what are all the costs we will pay? And then we'll just compare them. Just makes it easier.
Yeah.
So let me just give you a hand really quick. Let's just start on the lease side. So we're going to put all the cash for the down payment. So what is she paying cash for? Down payment, $2,000. What else? Taxes. How much is that? $125. How about fees? Is she going to pay those with cash? Yeah. So add each of those up, and that gives you her total. That gives you her total amount that she's going to pay cash for, and then she's going to finance the remainder. So what's the remainder she's going to finance? Dollar amount? 20,000. And now you've got to calculate. So 20,000 is her net capitalized cost. Now calculate her usage, calculate her interest, and then calculate her taxes. Okay. Are there other items in the lease? So, and that's the thing.
Yeah, so she negotiated. So the usage we did, so it was 20,000, right? So she negotiated costs. think that's the net capitalized. So you see, I thought you added these to it. So I think we only use the usage to get our interest costs. Do we? No, I guess that because it's lost value, right? That's a cost. So 6,200.
Calculate the usage, depreciation, and
So it'd be the 6,200 multiplied by. Yeah, I think so.
a couple more minutes, and then we'll go through it as a class. Okay. So how are we doing? Should we just move ahead? Let's kind of pick certain people to see if we can come and do this together. Let's do it as a class now. So the cost of leasing. So we wanted to say that there's certain cash costs that what we're going to pay. What do we pay up front in the cash costs? We said down payment. We also said we had taxes on the down payment. Then we had fees. So total paid outside the lease was basically $3,310. Eric?
Why isn't the sales tax on the entire purchase vehicle instead of just the down?
Because we'll pay the sales tax as part of the lease agreement, the remainder.
That's in every monthly payment.
Right, in every monthly payment.
Okay.
So right now, what are some of the extra costs a lease pays that a buy doesn't? Acquisition and termination fees. Okay, and then also these fees here, acquisition, termination, those can be negotiated. Okay, so now we've got, the reason we did this, someone asked the question up there, why would you pay anything out of pocket? Why wouldn't you just roll it into the lease? And the deal is, yeah, you roll it into the lease, but you're going to have to pay it every month. So if we pay some of these things up front, we don't have any monthly payments on those things as well. So it's a decision people make. Okay, now let's talk about our lease payments. So we're still working on the lease side. Okay, our usage, so remember it's your net capitalized cost minus your MSRP. 6250. How many people got that? Just raise your hand. Good, some of us got that. What's our next point? How do we calculate our interest? So remember, it's net capitalized cost plus residual divided by your money factor here. So here's our net capitalized cost. Here's our net capitalized cost. Here's our residual divided by 2. This is the average amount borrowed. Here's our average interest rate. Multiply it by 36. That gives us our total interest we pay over the time period. And then how do we calculate our taxes? This plus this times your tax rate. And so we have out-of-pocket expenses of 33. We have lease payments of 11,000. That gives us a total usage over this time period of 14,000. Okay, does that make sense? Do you see how we use the money factor? Net cap cost plus residual times your money factor. And your money factor is just your APR divided by 24. Yes?
So why do you pay taxes on interest with the lease where you pay taxes on interest with financing?
Another cost of the lease. Yeah, yeah. Now let's do the purchase here. So, and the way you calculate your monthly lease cost is your 11,132 divided by 36. So you'd pay 309.22. That'd be your lease cost. And now I'm giving you the way it's calculated. Now people have these calculators, lease calculators. You put it in, they give you exactly to the day, and they can calculate those. But I did this on a $45,000 vehicle, and you're within about 4 cents a month. So I'd like you to at least understand how to do this. Okay, now let's work with the purchase. So now we've got the purchase here. Again, our down payment, taxes. Now we're only paying $2,500 out the door on this. So let's calculate, first of all, our remaining amount is $20,000. So do we do our loan on the $20,000? Or do we have to add the taxes back in? So now we add the taxes back in. So we have to figure out the total amount to finance including taxes is $2,100. What's our interest rate? $21,250 is our present value. Here's our interest rate, our number of periods. Our payment, $669. $24,000. So total cost of vehicles, $26,000 versus what was the other one, $14,000? Lease just blows it out of the water. Oh, but you have the car at the end, Kia. So what do we need to do? So subtract out, and so $12,856. So now, have we done a good job at understanding the differences now? Now notice the difference here. The monthly payment, $669. What was the monthly payment with the lease? $309. So $350 roughly more. Do you see why people like to lease rather than buy? Of course, which costs more?
I guess it costs more lease, but most people aren't going to do this on a 3-year, are they?
It's not. So like I said, my cars, my 2006 has got 160,000 miles on it. My 2008 has about 100,000. You know, so if you need a car, how about what's the difference between a business versus personal? Car for personal use. What can the business do? Yeah, they write off the lease payments every month as an expense. And so realize the business side is a little bit differently. But a lease is a different animal. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the car buying process. Second thought, let me show you one more thing. As usual, this is teaching tool 22, lease versus buy analysis. So let's kind of go through and take a look at it. MSRP was 25. Capitalized or negotiated cost was 22. we said a $2,000 cap cost reduction, which was a down payment, gives us our remaining amount of $20,000. Here's our interest rate, our sales tax, number of period, residual value. Notice it gives us that same $13,750, and then each of our fees over here. And so now notice the things that we did here. So lease analysis, fees paid separately. So here's our 3310, which is our fees, amount to finance. Here's our depreciation, our interest charge, taxes, total costs. Notice our 309 that we calculated before is the same there. And then here we did it, down payment paid separately. So we said down payment and fees separately. So notice it comes through the same thing, 669, 12,731 versus 14,401. So you're looking at almost $1,500 difference, and that's just over the 3 years. So point here is there's the tool. Too bad you can't use the tool for the quizzes, but when you go out to to buy a car, at least it gives you a framework to understand. And actually what we did is sometimes people don't tell you what the lease amount is. And so if you go through and you put in the information and you give what their lease payment is, it'll actually back into your APRs for you. So just a little tool to kind of help you out. So let's talk about the process. The process of buying a car is, I think there's really 3 steps. Number 1, choosing a vehicle, your goals and your budget, safety reports, automobile reports, insurance. Realize when you buy a vehicle, you are choosing your insurance costs. When I bought that Mustang GT convertible, was my insurance higher or lower than my wife's minivan? A lot higher. Before you go, look, new and used vehicle prices, holdback, warranties, service contracts, lemon laws. And then after you found it, a vehicle history, checked by a mechanic, maintenance records. And so let's just kind of go through some of these things. Your goals and your budget. You know, when you're looking at a vehicle, make sure you figure out what's happening. Make sure you figure out lifestyles. If you're planning to finance the vehicle, and I don't recommend it, but make sure there's sufficient cost to cover the gas and the insurance, not just the cost of the vehicle, because there's a lot of other costs that go around. And then the question, are you putting aside money each month to finance a new vehicle in the future? Some people can't imagine a car without a car payment. I can't imagine a car with a car payment. And again, I've got $160,000 on my vehicles, and my goal is $200,000 per vehicle. Does that make me kind of take care of maintenance and things like that? Yeah, it does. But over the lifetime, you will save a significant amount by not having to buy a new vehicle every couple years. So, where do you find vehicle safety? We can go to National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, safercar.gov. I like going to these places and seeing what is. Let me just bring some of these things up. Safercar.gov. So should we look at a car? Vehicle. Well, child, let's see. Let's do safety recalls. So you can find safety recalls. We can go to for vehicle shoppers, and we can actually look which vehicles are the safest. You know, when I was getting a car for the teenagers in my family, we wanted something that had anti-lock brake, we wanted something with 4-wheel drive, and we wanted something with anti-lock braking system. You know what, and I'm thankful we did because, you know, 2 of my kids have totaled cars. So, but, you know, I want my kids to be as safe as we can. So look here, when you're looking at the vehicle, understand what you're looking for. So vehicle ratings and safety, and then automobile reports. You know, I like Consumer Reports. It goes in there, and not only tells me, you know, what the how good it is, but it tells me about electrical, and it tells me about transmission, and it tells me about each of those things. Because ideally, what you want to find a vehicle that you can run for a long time. 200,000 miles out of a vehicle, that's what I want. Realize on insurance. You choose your vehicle, you choose your insurance. And so when you're thinking about this really nice new Mustang, realize that the insurance costs are going to go along with it. So it's not just the cost of the vehicle, it's not just gas, it's your insurance costs. So sports, performance cars, SUVs are more expensive to insure. And so each vehicle has this loss number between 3 and 27. The higher the number, the more expensive the coverage. And so as you're thinking about a vehicle, talk with your insurance person. And this will give you an idea. And then the question is the new versus used. You know, a new vehicle, lot that goes with a new vehicle, that new car smell, you know. Lower maintenance costs, cars may last longer. Disadvantages, you know, once you drive it off the lot, what are you doing? Higher initial vehicle costs, higher insurance costs may limit other goals if you spend too much. I'm amazed. I've seen people who were kind of just trying to get by, and they've got $900 auto payments. I'm just saying, how can you survive that? That's more than people's car payments. So the decisions. I like used, but the key is to do it well. Lower initial costs, lower insurance, resources for other goals. So how do you figure, let's talk about with a new vehicle, how do you figure out what the dealer paid for the vehicle? Can you actually find that? Yeah, you can ask for the invoice. We were deciding between a Chevrolet Suburban and a Ford Expedition with 7 kids. So my wife wanted something that had 4-wheel drive. We moved back here to Utah. We had our Chrysler minivan. We live up northeast Provo, and the first snow, Foothill Drive comes down that hill, and it's pretty steep. My wife got about 20 feet down and just slid into the side. She parked the car and said, "This is not working." So we went looking. And so what we did is we went down and we actually asked each of the dealers, "Can you show me your invoice cost?" And we were going to say if they weren't going to show it to us, we would walk. And luckily they did, and they let us copy it. But then we went back and we went on the sites, KBB and Edmunds, things like this, and you can actually build the vehicle with all the options that you want. And the amazing thing was the difference between the internet sites and the dealer invoice sites for a $45,000 vehicle was about $100. So you can get a very good deal. You can understand what the dealer paid for it. Mike. Okay.
Actually, I almost got a car, and I did just last week, and the dealer invoice was for $21,179.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take into account the rebates
Right.
that they sometimes get, and that's taken into account on true car, and that showed that the dealer had a cost of $18,800, and they were going to be willing to honor a price like $18,800 or $18,900.
And well, you're just a little bit ahead of us, but that's a good website as well. So when you begin your negotiations, do you start at the MSRP? And the answer is no. You start at the invoice price. So the key here is to do your homework. And the hardest part is to figure out what you wanted. And so my wife and I, on that decision between the Expedition and the Suburban, you know, it's interesting when you've got 7 kids and you've got a lot of different things. One of the most important things was in the back of the Expedition, there was a button, and if you put the button, the seats came up, and you push another button, the seats went down. You know, we like both of those vehicles, but that was kind of a big thing. But put in the manufacturer model and options, and you can get the invoice price. And that's where we begin negotiations. 2, used vehicle prices. Can you do the same here? And the answer is yes. But the difference here is now what's the quality? Is it excellent condition? Is it good condition? Is it fair condition? And those will have an impact. So here's when I sold my Mustang GT. This is, you can see, you know, 6 years ago. But this is your NADA and low retail, average retail, high retail. And I actually sold it to a good friend, actually a friend of my brother's in Brentwood, California. You know, and she had that roll bar in it, and she was rear-ended at 45 miles an hour by an SUV. and she walked away from it. And it was really fun. I just went home for my niece's farewell, and she was there, and she had another Mustang GT. She really likes those. But the nice thing about this is this gives, again, this is information to help us in the negotiation side. So what's a holdback? You know, Mike was talking about rebates. We'll get to those. But what's a dealer holdback? Anyone heard that term? Holdback is a rebate to the dealer to hold the vehicle on its lot. So the longer you have a vehicle in the lot, the more expensive it is for the dealership. But so they give a holdback here. And so you can actually go on and you can find out what holdback. So the reason this is important, so even when a dealer is selling you a car below invoice, you can still be making money because they get the rebate on the holdback. How about warranties? Good idea or bad idea? First of all, warranty is what they give you. So warranties are good ideas. You know, you've got a full warranty, fixed at no cost within a specific time. You won't have to undertake unreasonable tasks to return it, and the defective product will be replaced if it can't be fixed. How about extended service contracts? So those are usually, cars are usually 36 months, some are a little bit longer. The manufacturer. But the downside is they're not really negotiable. But you can actually go back and find out, you know, there's a 2.5% holdback or a 3% holdback. How about service contracts? Good idea or bad idea? It kind of depends. I kind of like them. I like service contracts just because I'm pretty hard on equipment. And with all this electronic stuff, it just gets pretty expensive. I bought a 100,000 mile service contract for my Mustang. Maybe it was 75,000, something like that. And with 74,285 miles on, I took it up. It says anything the warranty will fix, you know, replace. But I have to admit, I've replaced 3 transmissions, 1 radiator, and a couple of other things there. And so it was a good deal for us. Service contracts, are they good money makers or are they poor money makers? For the dealership. Yeah, they make a good dealership. So just watch that. And I'll tell a story in a minute. Service contracts, lemon laws, just be aware. If you're having problems after you've had 4 attempts to fix the car, it was out of service for at least 30 days, take it back and you can get your money back. So let me just tell a story. Do you have to go into a dealership to buy a vehicle? No, we didn't. You don't have to. My wife and I did the research. We went to dealerships just to drive the vehicles that we want. And it came down to the Expedition versus the Suburban. And so we've driven them and we liked that. And we finally decided that we wanted the Expedition. So we actually went online and we found, my wife knew what she wanted. She wanted the sunroof. She wanted the electronic system. And we found one of the vehicles and it was up in Layton. I won't say the dealership, but it was up in Layton. And so we actually called the dealer there. And we said, we know you've got this vehicle on lot. It's got this and it's got these options. We'd like to negotiate the price for it. And so where do you start the negotiations? We knew what the MSRP was. We knew what the invoice price was. We also knew that gas prices were really high, and so there's not a lot of demand for this type of a vehicle. We needed it just because of 7 kids. So we knew that, and actually my wife was leaving the next day for Disneyland. And the weather wasn't good. So where do you start negotiations? Invoice price. So I got the guy on the line. I says, okay, I'll tell you what. We know, and I gave him the reasons. Gas prices. Not a lot of sales on these type of things. So it wasn't a really in-demand vehicle. And I says, I'll tell you what, we'll give you invoice minus $500. All of a sudden I heard, and you hear that on the end. And he goes, well, wait a second, let me go talk with my manager. And so, they always have to talk to the managers. So he came back and he says, invoice plus $500. And so I try to have fun at this, and so I kind of coughed a couple times. I just thought for a minute, said invoice minus $200. And he coughed again. Went back to his manager, and 5 minutes later he came back and he said, invoice plus $200. And I thought for a minute, that's not too bad. And so that's a pretty good deal. Then I kind of said the kicker, and I said, here's the thing. My wife needs the car tomorrow. to go to Disneyland. Can you drive the car, and we'll meet in Salt Lake, and I'll write you a check? And I actually had met this guy. We went to the auto show, and I met the guy that we were negotiating. So he knew who I was. He had my card. We had talked a little bit. And he said, then we talked a little bit about extended warranty. And I liked the extended warranty. And so we talked about, we negotiated a price for the extended warranty as well. And my price was out the door. And so needless to say, about an hour and a half later, we were on our way. We met at a Wendy's in Salt Lake. He and his wife brought the car. He drove the car. His wife brought the car. We sat it, and I even treated him to dinner, so I'm not that hard of a negotiator at Wendy's. And then we wrote him the check, and we drove the car home. And so the point here is, and it was really funny, about 6 weeks later, my wife got a call, and this is from this Ford dealership. And they says, well, how did you like their visit to our dealership? And my wife kind of smiled and says, I don't know. I've never been to your dealership. Because, you see, you don't have to. You don't have to go. Please.
How do we know, like, where a good negotiating point on the warranty is?
Yeah. Here's what I did. Story number 2. We were looking for a vehicle to replace the teenage car. And what we wanted to do is we went through all these things. We looked at safety tests. We looked at consumer reports. And we decided that Civic would be a good one for the teenagers. And so we went through, and then I found the invoice price. We calculated the taxes. And what do teenagers need? They need a radio, anti-lock brakes, airbags. So they needed something really safe. And actually, the Civic does pretty well in the snow, too. Just when it gets bad, like today, I told my daughter, no driving today. But what we did is we found the invoice price. And then I sent emails to about 5 different dealers, basically any place in Utah. And I said, I want you to give us the price out the door, and the next week we're going to be buying a vehicle and we're paying cash for it. Do they like to pay cash for it? Actually, they don't, because they make more money on the financing, but that's okay. And so I sent out, I think, about 6 emails, and I got 4 back. Now, do I really want to go to Layton, or do I really want to go to St. George to visit? No, I don't. What do I want to do? Where do I want to buy it? The local place. And so then I took the best deal, and I walked up to we drove up to the Honda dealer here in Orem, and I said, if you can beat it by $100, we'll take it. And this was the out-the-door price. He goes, I got to go talk to my manager. You know, the same copy. But he talked to his manager, and the manager came back and said, there are 5 cars out there. Take your pick. And so we went out there and we bought a car. Now, the other thing, too, was so it was out-the-door price, and then I said, okay, I would like the warranty. And I said, I'm willing to pay $150 over your cost. Because, you know, they do need to get something here, and, you know, we can't be too hard-nosed. And they said, fine. And I was amazed at how much money they make on their warranties, at least the dealership we went into. But we got the warranty for $150 over cost. But the point here is understanding the rules of the game. And then once you find it, it's your vehicle history. And I apologize, I didn't get I went on yesterday to do for Carfax Online, and I don't have I didn't get my password back. They canceled my account. But Carfax is a neat place to get a vehicle history report. And it's fun. You go out, especially with used cars, as you go out and you find a car you like. If you go onto Carfax, you can actually find, okay, this vehicle was in Canada first, and then it went down to New York, and then it went up. And ideally, what you don't want a vehicle that's been with 15 different owners. But also, you want to find out and make sure it's not a salvage vehicle, things like this. If the price is really low, there's a good chance that it's a salvage vehicle. But I like Carfax as well. And you just put in the VIN number, and you can go from there. And then once you find the vehicle, especially for used ones, have it checked out. And then look at service records. How well do you keep that? Probably the most important thing is changing the oil every 3,000 to 5,000 miles. My wife loves Jiffy Lube. She takes it in, and she's religious on it. And that's probably why we get 200,000 miles out of the vehicles. You know, but even when you do all the right things, there are still challenges. Again, before the Civic, we were looking at something for my kids. And so we decided, again, our criteria was 4-wheel drive for the snow, anti-lock brakes for the ice, and then airbags for the kids. And so we were deciding on it, and we were looking between Jeep, and we were looking at a Jeep and Blazer, and we finally decided on the Jeep, just a Cherokee, and we thought that that would be a good one for him. And so we found this vehicle. It was actually a student, and we were very careful. So we went through and just did everything here. We did looking at consumer reports, looking at National Safety Administration. We did it. Went online. We found this vehicle. They were actually buying a Honda. We found this vehicle, and it had like 75,000 miles on it. And so we did all the things. So I took it down. We made the decision that this was a good one, and so it was a Saturday. And the Jeep dealership wasn't open, so we just took it down to a place here on Bulldog. And they looked at it, and they said, you know what, this is in pretty good shape. The couple of things wrong. You need your front sway bar bushings are out. That'll cost you about $150. Your rear bearings are going out. That'll be about $350. And so I talked with this couple, and we agreed. And you know, it was all consistent with, you know, kind of good condition vehicle from Kelley Blue Book. And so they said, well, it's going to cost you, you know, $450 to get it fixed, or $500. We'll just reduce that from the sales price, and then we'll be fine. And I said, good. You know, and I supposedly know what I'm doing. You know, I'm teaching this class. And so Monday I decided, well, let's take it down and get it fixed. And so I took it into the Jeep dealership. And they said, you know what, that's right. The front sway bar does need to be replaced. Now it's about $150. But they said, it's not your rear wheel bearing, it's your real differential bearing. Instead of $350, it's $750. And I go, oh no. So we replaced it. So, and then we had some family from Delaware coming out to visit, and they were going up to Idaho. And what I didn't realize is this couple, when they owned the vehicle, the tires were bald. And so what they'd done is just replace 2 tires instead of replacing all 4 on a 4-wheel drive. What does that do to a car when you only replace 2 tires? That's a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Yeah, the tires are running at different sides. And it was snowing, and so they had it in 4-wheel drive all the way up to Idaho and then 4-wheel drive all the way back. Well, when you've got tires that are a different size, that means the front tires are turning even at a little bit different distance than the back tires. And they got into Salt Lake, and all of a sudden they just got this really horrendous smell. And I go, oh no. And so they came back, and they went back to Delaware, and then we took it into the dealership. And I said, well, what's wrong? And they says, well, because of the tires, you fried your front transmission, and that's $750. I go, oh no. I said, fix it. You know how it is when you're frustrated. And so they fixed that. And as I was driving from the dealership, I noticed there was a noise in the car. And I go, oh no, what else could go wrong? So I turned around, I took it back, and they says, well, when you fried the front differential, you also warped the drive line, and that needs to be replaced. And that was another $350. We'd done everything right, and yet we still had this problem. And needless to say, my daughter turned 16 on Friday. We put her on the insurance on Monday. And on Tuesday, she totaled the car. Now, there is kind of a little bit of a good news here, and that is because we had followed the process, because we were wise in the way we had purchased the vehicle, when we got our insurance money back, we basically got the entire vehicle plus all the expenses we had put into it. But it's important that we understand. It's important that we understand the process. And again, the key is not the MSRP. The key is you start negotiations at the invoice price. Realize a car is a commodity. You know, and so if you can't get it at dealer A for the price you want, go to dealer B. Realize and put your arm around these guys, and you pull them in close to them, and you call them by name and say, John, I won't force you to take my money. But the key is, how well do we negotiate? We're stewards over the resources that the Lord has blessed us with. You guys now have the tools to be able to decide, is a lease a better buy versus a buy? Figure out your goals. Figure out how you want to do things in your family. But look at the long-term costs. Again, we're stewards over the things we have. Questions? Thanks, everybody.